It's just before 8 p.m. on Saturday the 11th of October 2025. We're at Old Trafford in Manchester watching the Betfred Super League Grand Final between Hull Kingston Rovers and Wigan. And Wigan halfback Harry Smith has just let go of a cut-out pass intended for Adam Kieran. If you're a rugby league fan, you probably know what's about to happen, but to understand what it means to a club, to a team, and to half a city, we have to look at the context. Rugby league had always been a winter sport since its inception in 1895. After a century of this, though, plans were afoot to shift the sport to be played in the summer months, where it wouldn't be competing for attention with football, soccer, and to increase the sport's market share in Australia. In 1996, the Super League was founded, and the fortunes of Wigan and Hull KR could hardly be further apart. As the move to Super League began, Wigan were flying high. They'd won the last 8 Challenge Cups, the last 7 championships, and they were in no mood to let their foot off the gas. So they decided to take on some side quests to rub rugby union's face in it. They played a 2-match challenge against Bath in 1996, winning the league game 82-6, but losing the union game 44-19. And in that same year, decided to have a run out at the Middlesex Sevens. The team they took to Twickenham that day included Sean Edwards, Andy Farrell, Inga Tuigamala, and Jason Robinson. The regular union teams didn't stand a chance, and Wigan absolutely walked it. Back in the 13-a-side code, Wigan would win the inaugural Super League Grand Final in 1998 and remain a side to beat, albeit not quite able to break the big one again, as a star-studded Bradford Bulls, emergent Leeds Rhinos, and latterly a determined St Helens side managed to keep them often out of the big dance entirely. In 2005, their captain and leader Andy Farrell defected to rugby union, and Chris Radlinski, a man to that point thought of as maybe the greatest fullback in the Super League era, announced his retirement from the sport. With all this change, you'd forgive Wigan for a rough start to 2006, but nobody expected them to win just one of their first 7 games. The club moved quickly to try and stave off relegation, signing halfback Michael Dobson from the Catalan Dragons and paying a record transfer fee of £450,000 for prop forward Stuart Fielden from Bradford. In spite of a points deduction for some salary cap shenanigans, the team ultimately rallied under new head coach Brian Noble, also formerly of Bradford, and finished the season in 8th. These moves galvanised the club. The next year they signed Australian halfback Trent Barrett and looked set to finish 4th, but another points deduction due to the salary cap put their playoff place under threat. They did make it into the playoffs, but after one of the great comeback wins against Bradford, rallying from 30 points to 6 down to win 31-30 at Hodgson, they lost to the Leeds Rhinos in a playoff eliminator. Skipping ahead to the end of 2009, and Brian Noble was let go. Despite his role in turning around the club's fortunes and leading the team to 5 semi-finals in 3 seasons, his inability to get to the grand final proved his undoing. Melbourne Storm assistant Michael Maguire was appointed head coach for the 2010 season, and this is the point at which any Wigan fans watching will start to lean forward in their chairs. Hull KR began the summer era much more inauspiciously than Wigan had. They started in the 3rd tier of professional rugby league, and it was rumoured and suggested that the 2 Hull clubs, Hull KR and Hull FC, combined to form one Humberside team, presumably by people with absolutely no knowledge of the history of the 2 clubs. This idea was predictably shelved. In 1997, Hull Kingston Rovers entered administration. Edward Klemke was appointed to run the club, and despite the attempts of former Hull FC player Tim Wilby,
we can't do it anymore. They'll run to the end of the season and that's it, they'll be gone, there'll be no more Hull Kingston Rovers, there's no room for them.
the club and a dedicated group of supporters rallied and managed to pull the club not only towards financial solvency, but to on-field success, winning a Wembley final in 1997, with the only instance of the Challenge Cup plate heading to East Hull on the back of a 60 points to 14 win over Hunslet. Even more remarkably, they finished second in their division the following season, despite their lack of funding and coach Steve Crooks resigning. In 2000, a buyer for the club was found, and after 3 long years, they finally left administration. The early aughts were a time of rebuilding and relative success for the club, finishing towards the top of the second division, now called National League One, and competing for the Northern Rail Cup. They actually managed to win the Northern Rail Cup thanks to their captain coach, former Parramatta halfback James Webster, in 2005. The club rewarded this by immediately demoting him and hiring Justin Morgan as head coach, fresh off the back of a shock run to the Challenge Cup semi-finals with Toulouse Olympique. 2006 was the club's biggest season in decades. In June, they were on a 17-match unbeaten streak and welcomed Super League stalwarts Warrington to Craven Park. And there, in front of 7,000 fans, the Robins went blow for blow with a Wyre side that were 4th in the Super League table at the time, and actually managed to win 40 points to 36. They took their unbeaten run to 24 when it finally came to an end against Leigh in the final of the Northern Rail Cup, their Challenge Cup effort coming to a similar end against the eventual treble winners St Helens. This didn't really matter though. Finishing top of the league gave them an automatic playoff semi-final spot, which they won, and ultimately they found themselves in the National League One Grand Final, which they also won. Hull KR had done it. They were a Super League team. Wigan only made the one off-season signing leading up to 2010, but it was a good one. Former Great Britain scrum half Paul Deacon would help them to a level of success they hadn't seen since the late 90s, holding first place in the Super League table for all but 2 rounds and sweeping the boards at the end of season awards ceremony. Point-scoring machine Pat Richards was named Man of Steel, young dynamo Sam Tompkins won Young Player of the Year, and Michael Maguire won Coach of the Year. It wasn't just on an individual basis they won either. For the first time in 13 years, Wigan won the Super League Grand Final, cementing Michael Maguire's place as an instant legend of the club. They couldn't quite replicate that success in 2011, but in a couple more 90s throwbacks they won the Challenge Cup, and Sam Tompkins had a run out for the Rugby Union Barbarians. At the end of the season, Maguire departed back to Australia, where a couple of years later he would bring South Sydney their first premiership in 4 decades. Replacing Madge was assistant coach Shaun Wane. They won the League Leaders' Shield in his first season, and Sam Tompkins was named Man of Steel, but they fell short of another Grand Final win. In his second campaign at the helm, though, Shaun Wane brought the Challenge Cup and Grand Final trophy to Wigan for the first time in the same year. They would lose the next 2 Grand Finals, thanks to Ben Flower and Leeds' 2015 Team of Destiny respectively. In 2016 they beat league leaders Warrington at Old Trafford, and in early 2017 became the first Super League team to win the World Club Challenge in 4 years, defeating Cronulla by 22 points to 6. Another Grand Final win in 2018 was Shaun Wane's swan song at the club, having won 3 Grand Finals, a Challenge Cup, a League Leaders' Shield and a World Club Challenge. Chosen to replace him on an interim basis was Adrian Lamb, with Sean Edwards holding a handshake agreement to step down from his role in Rugby Union to take up the job from 2020. Sean Edwards never came though, and Lamb was extended into the 2020 season. A very strange season ensued. COVID interrupted whole rounds and the league adopted a points percentage system. Ultimately, the club would win another League Leaders' Shield and they would compete in the Grand Final, in front of nobody. A surreal and low-scoring affair, the 2020 Grand Final is remembered mostly for its ending. Tommy Makinson attempting a drop goal, the ball ricocheting off the upright and fullback Jack Wellesby making a freakish play to ground it in the in-goal. Wigan wouldn't appear in another Grand Final for 3 years. This was the era of their hated rival St Helens, whose quintet of losing appearances from 2007 to 2011 became a speck in their rearview mirror on their way to a Grand Final four-peat. Wigan would be back though. Adrian Lamb was shown the door, and replacing him would be former Wigan Academy coach Matt Peat. Hull KR came out firing in Super League, winning their first 2 games against Wakefield and Huddersfield respectively. After their first loss, they managed to grab a blue blood scalp in the shape of a 26-16 win away at Wigan. This outburst wasn't sustainable though, and despite the controversial mid-season signing of Paul Cook from Hull FC, the club found itself scraping 11th place, by way of a 42 points to 6 win at those same rivals. It was all changed for the 2008 season though. The central funding had really taken hold and 11 new players came through the door at Craven Park, including Ben Galea, Clint Newton, Michael Dobson and Peter Fox, all of whom would make the Super League Dream Team the next year in 2009. Rovers finished 4th in 2009, making the Super League playoffs for the first time. Yeah, they lost in straight sets to Leeds and Wigan, but it was still seen by many around the club as a sign of growth and good things to come. That was about as good as it got, though. A playoff win the next season at Hull FC was their first such win, and it would prove to be their last for a decade. In 2011, Elvis left the building, Justin Morgan deciding to call it quits after an 8th place finish and a dismal playoff defeat at Catalan, and the club appointed Craig Sandercock to fill his gargantuan shoes. He didn't. 10th in 2012 and 8th in 2013 just wasn't enough for the club at this point, and despite a raft of new signings for the 2014 season, he was let go and replaced by former player Chris Chester. The 2014-15 off-season saw even more upheaval, a complete retooling of the squad with one eye towards the future. In 2015, Hull KR made it to Wembley once again after a shock defeat of the Warrington Wolves in the semi-final. Nobody expected them to win, right? Leeds were on course for a treble, and they were playing a fantastically expansive style of rugby that really emphasised second phase play. But nobody expected the absolute mauling they got. Rovers lost 50 points to 0 in one of the most depressing days in the club's history. There was no positive to take from it, no way in which this could be beneficial. Earlier in the season, Rovers recorded their biggest loss of the Super League era as well, 60 points to 0 at Wigan, a loss that had the club's brass offering free tickets to any Rovers fan who went to watch it. I do wonder sometimes how many people took them up on that offer. Rovers did go undefeated in the middle eights, this new system for determining who would be in the Super League for the next season, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Oh no. That part came next year. On the 2nd of May 2016, Roger Millward, the consensus greatest player in Rovers history, the man that coached them to their most famous victory, the man for whom a stand at Craven Park is named, passed away, and Rovers elected to retire his number 6 jersey. It was a devastating day for everyone involved with the club. Chris Chester was let go 3 games into 2016. 2 losses and a draw, and people were just fed up. Replacing him was former player coach James Webster, and despite a few good results, big wins against Salford, Wakefield and Castleford, and a win against Leeds on the 1st of April that had a lot of fans wondering if they were subject to an April Fool's Day prank, they once again found themselves in the middle eights. This time, though, they would not go undefeated. Star player Albert Kelly was disciplined internally for some indiscretion or other, and wasn't selected for the last 4 games, and as the final day of their season came around, a week before Wigan were due to play in the Grand Final, they found themselves at home against Salford in the £1 million game. Everyone knows what happened next. Rovers took an 18 points to 10 lead into the last 2 minutes. Niall Evalds scored in the corner. It wasn't converted. Oh well, thought the Rovers faithful, we'll just have to win by 4 instead of 8. And then with the last play of regular time, Greg Johnson put the ball down. Another missed conversion. Golden points. Kick-off to Salford. Gareth O'Brien. Halfway. Drop goal. Relegation. In some ways, it was a blessing in disguise. The club had made some remarkably poor recruitment decisions in the seasons prior, and most Super League contracts contain a clause that nulls them should the team be relegated. This way the club could start afresh, and they already had the man who would lead them through the Championship. Tim Sheens had been the coach of Canberra during their Premiership runs of the early 90s, of Australia during the 2000s, of West's Tigers when they won their only Premiership to date in the NRL, and now he was going to coach the newly relegated Hull Kingston Rovers. They tore through the Championship and made it back to the middle eight, seeking promotion at the first time of asking. They secured it after 5 games. Ryan Shaw's interception and Rob Chadwick's screeching call of "He's the quickest man on the field! It's Ryan Shaw! It's Ryan Shaw! Ryan Shaw! He's going in for Rovers! Ryan Shaw! Goes in for Hull Kingston Rovers!" Echoing long in the memories of Rovers fans everywhere. The next couple of seasons were broadly and in 2019 Tim Sheens was let go, with a variety of reasons cited. Rumours swirled around who they would get in to replace him, but not many people had Tony Smith's name circled. The former Huddersfield, Leeds, Warrington and Great Britain coach had taken some time out of the game after leaving the Wire at the end of 2017. 3 lacklustre but not dire seasons followed, including a last-place finish in 2020, the club being spared relegation only by the demise of the Toronto Wolfpack, and so optimism was low going into 2021. But then something unexpected happened. Behind a halves pairing of prodigal son Jordan Abdul, Rovers' standoff during their championship season, brought back on a permanent deal after a sojourn with London, an academy product-ish Mikey Lewis, and thanks to a stretch of 6 rounds in which they played only 1 game due to COVID, Hull KR finished 6th in the league. A playoff place beckoned, and who should they be playing but the Warrington Wolves, who, as we've seen before, have been a good omen for Rovers in knockout games. Many fans held their breath regardless. Warrington had finished third that season. The game was going to be played at their ground, and mid-season they had signed George Williams from the Canberra Raiders, following a remarkable couple of seasons at the Australian capital. Then KR took the Wolves behind the woodshed. Mikey Lewis announced himself to the league with a chip and chase try ripped right from Rovers' 80s heyday. Abdul pulled strings, kicked goals and scored a try himself, and KR shocked the league with a 19-0 win. Their first playoff win in over a decade. Yeah, they got tonked at Catalan the next week, but from where they'd been this time the year before, it just didn't matter. Things were looking up. Tony Smith was fired midway through the next season. Much like Chester, the reasons are complex, but the centre of it was his own announcing that he wouldn't be at the club the season after, long before that had been communicated via any official channels. He was replaced on an interim basis by Danny Maguire, who had been with the club since their promotion back to Super League as a player and latterly as a coach, and the season finished with Rovers in 8th. Not the progress many had hoped, but they did go over the River Hull and beat FC at their own ground with only 16 named players. Maguire had made it clear that he didn't want the job full-time. He wasn't ready for it yet. So Rovers began the process of searching for a new head coach, arriving at Willie Peters. The Matt Pete era at Wigan so far can be summed up in one word: success. He's had the Blur brothers of Bevan French and Jay Field playing as if they're one mind, a defensive steel reminiscent of the Sean Wayne days, and in general this absolutely machine-like feeling that you can't quite kill them. It's like playing rugby league against the Terminator. He won the first piece of silverware available to him, a Challenge Cup win at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium over Huddersfield, but he was made to wait for any more shinies as they were held to second in the table by Catalan and beaten in the Super League semis by Leeds Rhinos in an absolute shocker. In a flip of the script, Wigan didn't retain the Challenge Cup in 2023, but they did win the other two trophies available, beating Catalan in the Grand Final and setting them up for probably the greatest single season of success in Super League history. It began on the 24th of February. The four-time reigning NRL premiers Penrith came over to England, and on a rainy night in Wigan, they got beat 16 points to 12. Then came the Challenge Cup, in which Wigan ran roughshod over the competition. 44-18 over Sheffield, 60 points to 6 over Castleford, 38 points to 6 over Hull KR, and ultimately 18 points to 8 against Warrington to claim their second piece of silverware for the season. The league table was next, a couple of stumbles along the way and Rovers nipped at their heels, but ultimately Wigan would claim the league leaders' shield with a 64-0 drubbing of Salford on the last game of the season. Finally, the Grand Final against a nervous Hull KR outfit. It was a tight, low-scoring affair, with Bevan French the difference. He showed Mikey Lewis a dummy and darted between him and Matt Parcell to score the only try of the game. A Harry Smith drop goal put things to bed at half-time. 9-2. The quadruple was theirs. Willie Peters' time at Hull KR has been one of growth and change. In 2023 they made their first Challenge Cup final in 8 years, losing an agonising golden point drop goal against the Lee Leopards. The squad was racked by injury that season. Mikey Lewis spent a few games playing the unfamiliar position of fullback following veteran Lachlan Coote's retirement, and the club drafted in a host of loan players, including Canberra scrum half Brad Schneider, whose massive drop goal against Wigan put Rovers in that final to begin with. By the end of the season, though, the injuries really bit. A home playoff win against Lee helped lay some of those Challenge Cup demons to rest, but they were unceremoniously dumped out of the playoffs by Wigan, en route to their own Grand Final win. 2024 looked promising. Another fresh set of players, including New Zealand international Peta Hiku, Samoan Tyrone May and former Lance Todd Trophy winner Niall Evalds headlined things, while Jai Whitbread and Kalepi Tanganoa were picked up from recently relegated Wakefield. It was a shaky start against the old foe. Despite the Black and Whites playing for at least half an hour with only 11 men on the field, many believe Rovers could have run the score up well beyond 22 points to 0. It wasn't until round 5 that the squad settled. Hiku, who had been signed as a fullback despite not playing much of his NRL career there, was moved to centre, and career fullback Niall Evalds put in his place. Hiku then scored 2 tries in a win against Huddersfield, and suddenly everything looked a bit brighter. On the cup side of things, Rovers lost in their 3rd consecutive semi-final, but within the league they were right on Wigan's tail. Indeed, it was only a loss at Wigan on the 6th of September that consigned KR to second place in the league, but a home semi-final beckoned. Once again, they faced the Warrington Wolves in a knockout game, and once again, in spite of a ban to talismanic captain Elliot Minchella, they were victorious. The mood at Craven Park had scarcely ever been higher. To add to all this excitement, star standoff Mikey Lewis was named Man of Steel in the week leading up to the Grand Final. This was Rovers' first Man of Steel since Gavin Miller in 1986, and it was just reward for the man who had been at the heart of all of KR's successes in 2024. Also named in the Dream Team was club captain Elliot Minchella, as well as Leeds Rhinos second rower Rhys Martin. More on him later. I've already spoiled what happened next, but Rovers would be bringing back most of their players from that Grand Final, and they would tack on a couple of big additions. It was always going to be tricky backing up after winning literally everything there was to win, but bringing back more or less the whole squad that did it was a start. To kick their season off, Wigan invited the Lee Leopards to the Brick Community Stadium, in the highest attended opening round game Super League had ever seen. In honour of their being selected to play in Las Vegas later in the season, they brought in Michael Buffer for the ground announcements, and the party was in town. What followed was a very strange game. The first Super League game to ever finish 0-0 after 80 minutes. Gareth O'Brien hit a golden point drop goal, I feel like I've said that before, for Wigan to start their quadruple defence with a 1-0 loss. In round 3, Wigan went to Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, where they folded a Warrington team that looked as though it had enjoyed a bit too much of their Vegas nightlife. 2 weeks later, they surrendered their hold on the Challenge Cup, a shock defeat at Hull FC, leaving fans and players reeling. They followed that up the next week with another loss, this time to the Leeds Rhinos. They won their next 9 to keep the blowtorch on the league leaders race, but ultimately fell short, finishing second in the league. They had a home semi-final against the Lee Leopards, but of course, this being Super League, it couldn't be straightforward. In the days leading up to the game, Wigan made a press release alleging that Derek Beaumont, the Lee Leopards' boss, had threatened to pull out of the game entirely due to dissatisfaction with ticket allocations. This went back and forth, with Beaumont penning a 4,000-word letter in response to this allegation, but ultimately the match went ahead. And if anything, it looked like the distractions had affected the Leopards more. They fell 18 points to 6, and Wigan were off to their third consecutive Grand Final. Hull KR made a statement before the season even began, unretiring their number 6 jersey with permission from the Millward family and giving it to Mikey Lewis in a huge declaration that he was to be their main man going forwards. Like Wigan, they also went abroad early in the season, playing against the York City Knights in Amsterdam. Despite sending a distinctly reserve grade side, Rovers' loss was seen by many as indicative of a flash in the pan that wouldn't see anything close to a grand final this season. A 1-point victory against Castleford didn't do much to allay those fears, nor a 2-point squeaker against the freshly promoted Wakefield Trinity, but a 40-0 drubbing of a Salford team in some measure of disarray blew those cobwebs clean out. They followed it up with a 20-10 victory at St Helens, a game that set the tone for their season. Rovers' line speed, kick chase and fitness were all on show as they stifled the Saints. This victory saw KR take the top spot of the Super League table after round 4, a position they would not relinquish. One of their new signings, former Leeds and Papua New Guinea captain and 2024 Dream Team back rower Rhys Martin, suffered an injury in the Wakefield game. Martin was signed not just for his leadership and quality as a second rower, but also for his skill as a goal kicker. Turning 4s into 6s was one of Rovers' big downfalls the season prior, so the club moved quickly to fill those kicking boots. They sent Niall Evalds off to Huddersfield. He was already slated to move to the Giants at the end of the season, but Rovers released him early so he could spend more time with his son, and brought in French fullback Artur Morg from the Catalan Dragons. Morg slotted straight in, and added another dimension to KR's attack with his own kicking game and experience as a halfback in his own right. After a quick Challenge Cup trip across the city to beat Hull FC, Rovers welcomed Wigan to Craven Park in a grand final rematch, and their unbeaten start to the season was shattered. The Robins headed back across the city once more on Good Friday to vent their frustrations and handed FC another beating, 28-14, with another new signing scoring his first, and indeed only, try for the club. Jared Warrior-Hargreaves was signed to a 1-year deal with Hull KR, the Kiwi legend being a good friend of Rovers' former captain and current coach Sean Kenny Dowell, and his impact on the team as a whole was obvious. A true leader in the forward pack, Peters and SKD made no bones about the fact that they had signed him as much, if not more, for what he brought off the pitch as what he brought on it. In May, Rovers took part in their 4th consecutive Challenge Cup semi-finals, this time against an off-the-boil Catalan Dragons, Artur Morg's old club. Due to cup rules about playing for multiple teams in one campaign, the French fullback had to sit on the sidelines and watch Hull KR's Mr. Fix-It, Jack Broadbent, put in a magnificent shift in relief, scoring 2 tries in the 36-12 romp that saw Rovers return to Wembley for the 2nd time in 3 years. 3 more wins, including a victory over cup final opponents Warrington, saw Rovers enter June with a spring in their step. An old foe waited for them at Wembley though. Warrington had signed Mark Sneed from the struggling Salford Red Devils. The 34-year-old playmaker knew all about Challenge Cup finals, having steered hated rivals Hull FC to back-to-back wins in 2016 and 2017, winning the Lance Todd Trophy for Man of the Match both times. Rovers, though, had recruited their own Challenge Cup winners, including the aforementioned Rhys Martin and hooker Mickey McAlorum. Mickey Mac was part of the furniture at Wigan during the early 2010s, winning 2 Challenge Cups and 2 Super League Grand Finals. In 2018 he unexpectedly signed for Catalan and helped steer the Dragons towards their first ever piece of silverware at Wembley in his first season at the club. Now he was playing for Rovers in his last season as a professional, and like JWH was there to inject some hard-nosed intent and stick-to-itiveness into proceedings. To that end, he would be playing in the Challenge Cup final less than 2 months after rupturing his bicep, a full 6 weeks ahead of schedule. It was a miserable day at Wembley, unseasonably so for early June, and that played right into the Wolves' hands, as almost none of what had made Rovers so successful earlier in the season seemed to stick. Passes didn't go to hand, kicks were dropped, and Sneed made life hell for KR's back 3. Mikey Lewis opened the scoring with a penalty goal, but no goal lines were breached until the stroke of half-time, a classic kick from Sneed bouncing awkwardly into the hands of winger Josh Thewlis for the opening try. Sneed converted, and after an attritional first half, Warrington went into the shed 6 points to 2 up. Much of the same in the second half, a few good moments for KR, but broadly they were well restricted by a Wolves outfit that just looked more up for it. This continued until the 75th minute. Errors cheered like tries and neither team able to deal the knockout blow. Hull KR found themselves inside Warrington's 20 metres. A few tackles later, Tyrone May made a snaking run, looked up, saw a gap, threaded a kick through, and Tom Davis, signed from Catalan in the off-season to replace another legend of the game in Ryan Hall, pounced. The video referee was called in to judge. Had Aaron Lindop grounded the ball in goal? Had Petahiku grazed it with his fingers to knock it on? The answer to both questions was no. And Mikey Lewis, with the weight of half a city's expectations on his shoulders, stepped up and slotted the conversion. Rovers held on to win, 8 points to 6, to end a 40-year trophy drought that had been the subject of so much ire over the last few years. The work wasn't done yet, though. There was still a league to consider. Fears of a Challenge Cup hangover, not to mention a regular hangover, affecting performances were blown out of the water by a 68 points to 6 win over Catalan and a 48-0 demolition job at Castleford. 2 losses in early July had some alarm bells ringing, but Rovers had built up a comfortable cushion in terms of points difference over the season thus far. Heading into the last few games of the season, Rovers were already assured of a home playoff semi-final, but to win the League Leaders' Shield they had to keep Wigan at bay. Round 22 was the battle at the Brick. Rovers against Wigan, for a game many saw as the League Leaders' Shield decider, and in front of 20,000 fans, Rovers walked away 10 points to 6 winners, thanks to a Dean Hadley try and a trio of Rhys Martin goals. It came down to the last game of the season in the end, at home against who else but Warrington. Once again the wire looked the sharper of the two teams to start proceedings, Rovers looking every bit the side that had played all but one possible game over the last 2 years, and whose physical style must surely have been taking its toll on the bodies of the men wearing red and white. The lead seesawed between the two teams, and with 15 minutes left to play the wire were ahead, but then up to the rescue stepped Artur Morg. Sneed put up a steepling bomb, and the French fullback, safe as houses under the high ball all year, pouched it cleanly, broke half a dozen tackles, and had just enough pace to run 80 metres despite the attention of Warrington's fullback. Tyrone May provided the dagger, uncharacteristically taking the line on and breaking a few tackles himself to score under the posts. Rovers had won the League Leaders' Shield. They now had a week off to rest and recuperate. After a St Helens win against Leeds that could be the story of a video all of its own, some Rovers fans were relieved. Leeds were the only side to really have the wood on KR this season, winning the last 2 games the teams had played, so for St Helens to beat them in such an emotional manner meant Rovers instead faced a side that had struggled for an offensive identity for much of the season, a carousel of playmakers never quite able to cement their positions. Rovers dominated the first half, in field position and possession at least. The Robins will have been disappointed to only be leading 12-0 at half-time. An early second half try to Dion Cross had some butterflies waking up, but Rovers quickly put them and the game to bed through Petahiku and Oliver Gildart. It was back to Old Trafford, and a date with the Wigan Warriors once again. Anyone who tells you that they were confident in their prediction for the Grand Final is a liar. Alright, Rovers had won their last encounter, and yes, they had sat at the head of the table since round 4, but none of that counts for anything in a one-off game against the peat field French Wigan Warriors. One missed tackle, one dropped assignment, one pass that doesn't go to hand, and it could be over. The start was tentative, Rovers looking ever so slightly overawed by their surroundings. They knocked the ball on a couple of times in the first 15 minutes, fortunately able to make it dead and stop any chances of a quick Wigan counter, and defended ably. It looked like a repeat of last year though, when an early Liam Marshall kick looked to be dotted down by Bevan French. However, on video review, it was seen that Mikey Lewis, derided since their last meeting at Old Trafford for not playing well in quote-unquote big games, caused the Wigan Dynamo to lose control just before getting the ball down. This seemed to reinvigorate the Robins, as did a few minutes later when Brad O'Neill dumped Tyrone May on his head. The Wigan hooker was sat down for 10 minutes, and Rovers capitalised with Lewis sending Bevan French for a pie and running in to score under the posts. Fitting that he should score their first try at Old Trafford. A few minutes later, and a shift out to Joe Burgess, himself with some Grand Final demons to contend with, as a loss this evening would see him hold the record for most games without a win, got the ball down with millimetres to spare. The first half ended with Adam Kieran knocking a penalty goal through from easily 50 metres on the angle, and the sides went into half-time 10-2. A lot of people thought it might be next try wins, so when Wigan burst out the gate with a shift to the left seeing Jay Field leave Petahiku in the dust and Harry Smith finishing the try off, you'd forgive a few Rovers fans for letting their heads drop. The players didn't. A rampaging run from Jared Warrior-Hargreaves gave Jez Litton, Rovers Player of the Season, room to roam. He linked up with his second rower James Batchelor to put Petahiku into space, and then, as all good hookers should, backed up his centre to score a delightful Grand Final try. Rovers then executed an Old Trafford game plan to remember. The in-goal areas at the Theatre of Dreams are a lot shorter than they are at any other rugby league ground, so Rovers' plan was simple. Don't put the ball into the in-goal unless you're scoring a try. There were no short grubbers, hardly any kicks to the corner from short distance. It was all running lines and trying to put players through gaps. And if you get tackled on the last 2 metres out, then that's where you turn the ball over, and that's fine. They didn't give an inch of space to Field or French. Bar the one try, every tackle stuck, every defensive read was on point, and every player was backed up by 2 or 3 of his mates to make sure that Wigan could not get on the front foot. It was everything that had put Rovers at the top of the league so early in the season. A real defensive masterclass. And then we get back to here. Harry Smith, in the shadow of his own goalpost, trying to create some space for Adam Kieran. Hull KR are 2 scores in the lead, and there are only a handful of minutes remaining in this game. We've seen before, though, that 2-score leads in important games can evaporate in the blink of an eye. But then these are not the 2016 Hull Kingston Rovers. That being said, they're not facing the 2016 Salford Red Devils. They're facing the 2025 Wigan Warriors, not far removed from conquering the club rugby planet. With the speed of Jay Field and Bevan French, the slightest gap could spark something devastating. But if Rovers can stop this attack, they will win a domestic treble for the first time. They will see 40 years of hurt cut down with the most successful single season in the club's history. They will send Jared Warrior-Hargreaves and Mickey McAlorum, playing this game despite a fractured ankle that would see lesser men unable to walk at all, off as champions. And they will put a new name on the Super League trophy for the first time in 2 decades. I leave you now with HullKR.TV commentator Rob Chadwick on the call.
Oh, there it is! Burgess dives over in front of the Rovers fans